Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
Shall we go for it?
Let's do it, mate.
We are both, well, I'm certainly full of drugs, as we are surrounded by some cold weather and some winter, and we've both got a little bit of a cold. So I'll start with an apology to the listener for my sniffles that they may hear, and I've got some menthols to be breathing in. How are you feeling, brother?
Similar. I think you're worse than me, but I don't want to. It's not a competition.
Yeah, I sound worse than you, but you sound better than me because you've got a nice new microphone as well. So we're always investing, folks. We're always trying to get better. I wanted to start off with a really important acknowledgement to the loss of a great colleague and brother, something we spoke about at length today and people have seen on social media. Paul Grimwood unfortunately passed away. It will have been quite a couple of days ago when this podcast eventually goes out. For anybody that's not familiar with Paul, he joined London Fire Brigade in the 60s, 67 I think it was, only 18 when he joined, and he's been on many adventures, travelled around the world, became quite the fire behaviour expert, published a lot of books which people will have no doubt seen on bookshelves in and around the world and probably don't know who that person is and where it came from. Euro Firefighter is one of his more influential pieces that perhaps people, and Eurofighter 2 that came after it. A great man, a great person that tried to leave a truly positive impact on the community. And I often say, and it's a podcast, it's an episode that we put, it's a post that we put out on the podcast quite regularly around people doing that copy and paste career. You know, you said you were going to make a difference. I read one the other day where it was about, I've lost my teeth. You know, how many times did you say you were going to get your teeth into things, but you were waiting for the right thing to come along and you were waiting for the thing you were going to make a difference on, and then you eventually realized that all your teeth have fallen out because you never got into it. You never grabbed something by the horns and went for it. And I think Paul is a shining example of someone that's done that. And it can be a cop-out when people look at him and go, oh, well, easy for him. You know, everyone knows who he is and he's an international. He joined 18 in London Fire Brigade in 76. How many people do you think were really up for listening to his ideas in 76? Yeah. I bet he had a lot of eyes rolled and a lot of, get back in your box. Go and learn the job first. Go and blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? But he's a great deal.
Yeah, and didn't know Paul, but share your sadness in terms of the loss, not just for Paul's family and friends, but for the sector as well. And you know, what a career, looking back on what he's done and the difference that Paul will have made and will continue to make because his work will live on. And like you say, you know, sort of thinking back to the early 70s when, you know, particularly in London Fire Brigade, you know, it would be busy, operational, and a lot of what we know today, and looking at some of the work that Paul's done on fire behaviour, you know, a lot of what we know today is most likely been influenced by Paul's work. Yeah. And generations of firefighters will have been influenced by Paul's work. And I think what a legacy, and by all accounts, what a lovely bloke. A sad loss to our world, I think, a sad loss.
I think he was one of those polite interrupters. Do you know what I mean? He never seemed provocative or antagonistic in his communications. He would politely point us in the directions that he felt we were not giving enough focus to. But he never did it in an accusatory manner. You know, I never saw him speak out particularly against national fire organisations or fire brigade unions or anything like that. And he was that polite, professional disruptor. I think we need that. And I know that's something we try and aspire to with the podcast. We're never there to point fingers, but we're there to politely nod at something else and go, I think we all collectively agree this is interesting and perhaps needs a bit more discussion in a free space without any finger pointing and vicious words.
Yeah. I think Paul achieved that, and I think I don't think there's any greater tribute to his memory than that, really, Pete.
He was the one that got away. So I had quite a few chats with Paul about him coming on, and then he got poorly. So I suppose that's my ask as well. And it's almost that constant sense of guilt when we're going to have people on and people go, oh, but I'm a nobody. And, they think they only know what they know. I'm like, yeah, but most people don't know what you know. So come and talk about it. Otherwise, one day you'll be gone.
Yeah, absolutely. We're only here for a short time, Pete. 4,000 weeks, if you're lucky.
Yes,
Great book.
4,000 weeks. Oh, you're testing me now, Oliver Berkman.
Yeah. What a fantastic book.
Oh my God, 4,000 weeks if you're lucky. That's all you get, folks.
Yeah.
And I think about it in counting Christmases as well sometimes. Like, okay, I'm 35. I might get 50 Christmases left if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Maybe. A lot of my family have actually died a lot younger than that in the 60s and 70s. And we spoke about a member of my family who's just passed away. She has twin girls and she passed away in her mid-30s. You don't know how long you've got. But anyway.
Yeah, on that cheery note, I think the lesson the thing it gives us is, we all assume there's going to be a tomorrow, and we all assume there's going to be a next week, and it goes back to your point about just getting your teeth into something. If not now, when? I know it's one of your favourite sayings. And
it's tattooed on my left bicep. If not now, then when?
If you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? And
sometimes you got to go with what you've got, haven't you? Yeah. You know what I mean? It's never going to be perfect.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
So we've got a number of things, a number of great conversations, great episodes, great little adventures that we've had recently, and we're going to attempt to delve into them. People will have heard, if they listen to the podcast, they'll have heard some of the emergency services takeaways. So this was your first time coming with us as part of the team. You're able to sacrifice a day of your busy life to come and descend once again on the emergency services show. How did you feel about it from the other side of the fence, brother?
That's really interesting. And I think you see things from a different angle when, you're no longer sort of responsible for the procurement of things and what have you. And I think one thing it did allow me to do was just take a broader view of, and the thing I take away from it, I think the highlight for me was just a reminder of some of the voluntary sector that support the fire and rescue, police, ambulance. And, I think listeners to the podcast will hear the episodes around, we spoke to people from the lifeboats, we spoke to people from the Search and Rescue Dogs Association. There was Coast Guard, all voluntary branches to their organisation. And I met some really interesting people as well, as I'm sure you did, Pete, one of which was the Blue Light Symphony Orchestra, which was a group of dedicated people who use sort of that musical therapy bit for good. Therapy dogs. They were a huge hit. They were around the show all day. And you know what? I think sometimes we forget the role that the voluntary sector plays in that emergency response. Yeah. And I think we'll maybe touch on some of the JESIP stuff, the interoperability stuff today. But a true multi-agency incident, involves not only Category 1 responders, those with statutory responsibilities to respond, but the Category 2s as well. Those that play that vital role in providing welfare facilities, the rapid relief teams, and we've all benefited from that at incidents and continue to do so. And you know what? I think the big takeaway for me when I got my head around, getting away from all the shiny new stuff, was just going and speaking to some of the people that provide that support to the emergency services sector. And for me, that was the big takeaway for me. What about yourself?
They're often the ones down on the bottom end, aren't they? Because they haven't got the big Gucci 40 grand stores. They've got a little box that they sit in somewhere, and it's your React, it's your 999 reset, it's your PTSD 999, like you say, it's your RNLI, it's your St. John's ambulance, it's all of those types of individuals who play a collective good in our organizational resiliency and certain community resiliency. When we think about local resiliency forums and the JESIP principles we're perhaps going to touch on today, they're always the nicest ones. I love them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they don't often get the praise. And they're usually the most interesting people.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are trying to create life-changing differences for struggling members of the community, and they're doing it with some goodwill, some plasters, some 20-year-old kit, and no budget. Yeah, and they're just going for it.
Yeah, and they're all doing it for the right reasons as well. It's just a wonderful. It was refreshing to remind ourselves, or remind myself about the good that people will do for their community. It was phenomenal.
So let's touch on. We've got a list of a couple of episodes that we wanted to highlight, some discussion points from things that we wanted to discuss out of them. And the first one up on the docket we had as Nikki Power. Fantastic lady, really, really interesting. I love having academics on. I don't know if I'm allowed to have a preference, but sometimes these are my most interesting, because the Dan Stevens and other people of the world, we can get into those romantic loving of the fire service, and don't get me wrong, he's got a good analytical mind as well. But when you're able to zoom out from someone that hasn't got both feet in the camp, like Nikki, where she has that academic with a professional interest in the things that we do, her conversation on decision making and teamwork in high pressure environments. Now, obviously, you weren't able to join us on that particular episode, but ironically, you perhaps would have been better at it, because you've kind of been in the depths of some of those interoperable JESIP principles when it comes to a senior leader's role. What were some of the takeaways that you took from it, mate, and things that perhaps avenues we could have explored more?
This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA connected firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
Do you know, I think the first thing, Nikki, incredibly knowledgeable around the JESIP. And I think one of the things that I took from it and enjoyed listening to, because I do remember the JESIP sort of coming in, the program coming in, and Nikki sort of reflected on the initial sort of investment in the sector, and that there was an awful lot of, there was a team dedicated to the implementation of JESIP. And I've seen that change over time as well, because obviously as JESIP has become embedded within the emergency services, that sort of investment has sort of dropped down. But I think one of the lessons that needs highlighting from that is that it does require continued investment. I think Nikki had identified that and makes a good point. She made a really good point that the JESIP, the interoperability team, is very few people who are dedicated to supporting all the emergency services and what they do. But what was really interesting as well was that discussion around the national decision model with the police, where the joint decision model comes from. And I think many people forget that it was actually born from the police national decision model, the NDM. And that was a really interesting part of the discussion, because it took me back to a time before we had the joint decision model. And all emergency service commanders will be familiar with the joint decision model, decision controls, and it's our decision, their decision making process today. But there was a time before that as well, when we didn't have the joint decision model, we didn't have the national decision model. I can remember looking at the NDM, the police model, before we had our JDM, and thinking, wow, that's really good. That makes so much sense. Why don't we do that? And in many ways, JESIP is so commonsensical in terms of the interoperability principles that it's hard to argue against it. But again, I have the benefit of doing some incident command assessing for colleagues across the country, and you do see variations in some services adopt it wholly, some to a lesser degree. But I think the best commanders and those that come up with the most rounded decisions are the definition of what Nikki talked about, which was the interoperable leader, which is about having an awareness of other agencies' pressures, decisions, having a little bit of empathy for our health colleagues that are absolutely flat out 110% of the time. And I think what I certainly see from the incident command assessing and tutoring role that I have is just that the best commanders, or often the most effective commanders, are the most interoperable, if that makes sense. And that really resonated with me. Nikki makes a really good point in there around just having some of the softer skills, technical skills and technical expertise that, absolutely there's a place for it and it's needed. But very often, I think in the multi-agency world, it is about that interoperability, that soft skills. And one of my colleagues that I do assess with had a really great point and made a really great point last week. And he said, so when you walk into that multi-agency environment, the best commanders or the most effective commanders are saying, how are you, rather than who are you? And it's the relationship building as well. And I think Nikki makes a really good point on that. So that interoperable leader, and I'm sure you've got some reflections on that from your experience as well, Pete.
I think the point you make there around people being less concerned about how important is this person to me before I give them my empathy, you can get off on the wrong foot very quickly.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. This person's clearly here because they've got professional capability to add value to our collective efforts. But we do have this hippo. I always talk about it as the hippo's opinion, the highest paid person's opinion. And people can very quickly lean into that. And that's not the basis of where Jessup, but even within the sphere of the fire service alone, that's not, very rarely does that have the greatest outcome for me. And we can fall into that habit of just yes manning or yes womaning, if it were such a statement, to the individual that's got the most experience or is the highest paid or is the most senior person on the Instagram. We actually reflected on a previous guest and how that can have a very detrimental effect on other people's growth and development if you're acting as the long screwdriver too often and suffocating people's ability to develop. Help me understand just very quickly, because the JDM, very useful, very effective tool, and we've praised it with many compliments there. Echoing on a different conversation with another guest recently, how is it so very different from the London decision-making model? Because, I speak to people, we don't like change for the sake of change. And I fear there being another change to incident command models in the future. There should always be variations in development and progress and innovation. But change for the sake of change, I think some people that don't use the JDM because they don't see that it being too different from the past. Could you just help for a second from your coaching and mentoring role and some of the stuff that you do with Incident Command? Try and sell us on how it adds that greater layer.
Well, it's interesting, and as we were sort of speaking there, I also, whilst I'm a fan of the JDM, the Joint Decision Model, it also constrains thinking. And, if you think about some of the best command decisions are probably, and most effective command decisions are probably not constrained within the rule book. And if we think about operational discretion as one of those kind of areas where incident commanders for all three emergency services will be faced with, probably as we speak, there will be commanders and teams out there being faced with decisions that the rule book just does not fit.
Yeah.
And you can't apply any form of kind of joint decision model. So you can go around the wheel and you can talk about powers and policies and you can talk about taking action, review what's happening and gathering all the information you can. And Nikki talks about information gathering and how much is good enough. And that was something else that we maybe sort of want to touch on, because I thought that really
that decision vortex that she talked me through. I
just need a bit more information. I just didn't need a bit more. I need a bit more that leads to that decision inertia. And I think sometimes the decision models can kind of breed that a little bit, because that the first part on the JDM is gather information and intelligence. Well, how much, and how much are you going to before you start moving on to the next and then actually start making a decision? So for me, I think that they're always going to be if you think about where it came from, the London model and the police model, it's all based upon hard experience of, people's decisions being scrutinized after the event. And again, Nikki talked about that in the podcast around that paralysis. And I'm sure you felt it. I know I certainly used to feel it, where you do think about the consequences of the decisions that you take. And however, that can lead to paralysis by analysis and that fear of, my God, at some point I'm going to be gripping the bar and I'm going to be, well, yes, I'm And I think the police, in many ways, have been very accustomed to that because of the legal judiciary that they work within. That's understandable. But I still think it's fairly new to the fire and rescue sector in terms of, being becoming accustomed to being scrutinised, your decision being scrutinised. But I think that's where the decision controls come in. And I think that's the bit where if you can't come to a decision using the joint decision model, which really just allows you to air, views and come to your decision controls around just so if we do this, what do we think will happen? And do the risks outweigh the benefits? I think it does air it to a point, but at some point somebody's got to actually say, this is what we're doing. I think when we're talking about an interoperable environment where it becomes a joint decision at that point, and again, it is a decision of the Tactical Coordination Group, the TCG, or the Strategic Coordination Group, the SCG. But there is still a void, there is still an area of grey decision making, and it tends to be the operational commanders tend to face this, which is the space in which they operate in operational discretion. And I think that's the place where we really need to focus that building the confidence and competence of commanders. And I think it brings into play that conversation around psychological safety. So how safe do you feel to make a mistake in your organisation and be backed up and be supported? And again, the general thing is, if you make your decisions for the right reasons on the rationale with the information that you've got at the time, your decision is what it is, and you've got to do something and take some action. But I think the operational discretion is a really interesting discussion. And whilst the joint decision model, the decision control process, it has its place. And I think, in certainly within the TCG and SCG environment, it's a really useful tool.
Yeah.
We've got to remember there are operational commanders making decisions at the early stages of an incident where they do not have the ability to literally go through that process over the bonnet, if that makes sense. And I think for me, we've talked about the churn and the change of people retirement profile within the fire and rescue service and other emergency services. And of course, experience is a big thing, and experience can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing and constrain you as well. And I thought Nikki touched on that decision-making process really well, and with a really sort of well-informed view. So I think, just to summarise your question a bit, I think, they have the place, and I think I'd hate to see us lose a decision model, but I think the skill is stepping outside of that when you have to, and being able to have the confidence to make a decision that will just have no optimum outcome. And again, going back to Nikki's podcast, she talks about the wicked problems. There is no optimal solution to this. It's just the least worst option.
The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, OpZulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HEART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways, as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the OpZulu bags are a game changer. So the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show.
There's no solutions, only trade-offs. That's the way I often think of it. And like I said, what is that minimum acceptable action, and trying to force yourself to limit the consequences of your actions to the incident ground, and not bring into your perceived consequences as being, what will people say? What will this look like in the debrief? Would Carl have done differently? What would my chief do in this situation? Because they can be very paralyzing thoughts. and just get you stuck in that, constant deliberation and decision reluctance, for want of a better description, because 100% certainty is only going to be available to you on reflection.
Yeah, that was a really
redundant deliberation just for the sake of it, whilst you're trying to hit that moving target.
It's important, isn't it? It's important to remember, and it's important that those decisions that are being taken every day, that those are what make the emergency services what they are, as effective as they are. And it does come down to the value of that decision maker as well, which I think placing that emphasis on the incident commander, and the value on their decision making, I think is a really important thing.
One thing that you made a note about for discussion today was this concept of zero responders. It's something I remember Ben Levy talking about, although I don't specifically think he articulated it as such. When you go to different countries and you see the resiliency or action that's willing to be taken by members of the public, what do you make of zero responders?
Do it's something that I think until it happens to you yourself, you can't really fully appreciate what it's like to come across something. And again, that's my understanding of the zero responder, perhaps just for clarity, is those people that turn up at the scene at the time. They're either there, take action, get involved, support before the arrival of the emergency services. And I think if you think about in the world of the emergency services, we're on duty, we get called, we get our heads into gear, we turn up, and we follow a process within our team. And very often you'll see the man or the woman at the side of the road who was first there, or there's somebody in with a casualty in the car, or there's somebody has entered the water to go and save somebody. I don't think it's until you're ever in that position yourself that you can ever truly appreciate what it kind of takes to take that sort of action. And I think, for me, I think it sort of hit home to me, once or twice on my way to work, you come across a serious road collision, RTC, or something untoward, somebody stuck in floodwater, and you suddenly realise that you're not there with your team, you're not there with, and you are there, yes, we've got the knowledge, but we haven't got any of the team behind us, and actually getting stuck into the car while you're on the phone to control saying, can you mobilise 2 pumps to this, please? And I think it's a reminder that there's zero responders, but by the time we get there, they could have taken some action that could well have prevented the death, escalation. And I think, a lot of fire and rescue services do this, and a lot of emergency services do this, but they have awards and recognition for people that have taken meritorious
local
action.
Heroes.
Absolutely. And I think, the road, it just restores your faith in human kind of,
We have examples of that already though, don't we? I mean, like in a lot of places, there's like catastrophic bleed sets that you can access. There's obviously defibrillators that people can access. There is flotation devices at local water spots that people can access. But when you take that further, I think Ben was given an example of maybe it was Vietnam. I've been to Vietnam, and I think it was Vietnam we were talking about, where in the lobby, and again, Russ Timpson's probably a better one to talk to this because he certainly knows, in the lobby of certain high-rise buildings, there's 2 BA sets and a hose reel, and members of the public are encouraged to use them. Now, I'm not sure I'd go so far as putting BA sets out, but I do think to myself, how far do you think we should go with minimum safe, acceptable action? I think most of the members of my family could operate a hose reel, operating at, a charge riser, which is going to have a head of pressure in it. Won't be a great deal, to be honest with you, will it? What's it going to be? It's not going to be 10 bar, it might be. But again, coming through a hose reel, it's manageable, It's not a lay flat hose that's going to throw you off your feet. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, in many buildings they're already fitted with the fixed hose reels and extinguishers, which are provided for means of escape and that sort of thing. And it's I
don't see any hose reels anymore.
Yeah, they're only fitted for and I think there's a real conversation. You probably see them in older buildings where they were fitted as a but there is a recognition there that once you've got an unlimited supply of water and you've got a member of the public on the end of that, how long are they going to stay there? Let's be honest, most fire safety strategies for buildings are for life protection only, and it's about getting people out of the building and evacuating and maintaining the means of escape. It's not.
Well, the problem is it's not about getting them out a lot of the time, is it? Because a lot of these places are stay put policies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a really interesting
one. And I'm just playing devil's advocate there, and I'm like, well, what if we're just to again devil's advocate on what you've just said? How long are we encouraging people? That's all their stuff in that hotel, in that apartment. I think they're going to grab it and try and do something, and then they might be, they're going to inhale some smoke and might be overcome by whatever, but we know what we're doing now in the worst cases of examples like Grenfell and others. But I know, again, there's so much noise around that. It's a difficult one to say, would it have made a sodding difference, Pete, if, Jim from flat 17 would have gone and got a hose job? I don't know. But he's there at the point of origin, way before it's got big enough for us to try and deal with it and climb up God knows how many floors to try and make an attempt. And that fire has been given an extra 20 minutes to develop and spread to the point where it's now does require a trained firefighter. But in its origin, it's the same thought process as a fire extinguisher, isn't it? It's just how far along that risk spectrum do you want to travel and still trust a member of the public to interact with it?
Yeah, I think the difference between a fire extinguisher is it'll run out in about 10 seconds. If you haven't put the fire out by then, you want to be walking out. True. The difficulty with a hose reel is it's not going to run out of water.
You can keep going as long as you think you can take it.
Yeah. And I think it's really, I don't agree. I think the fire protection measures in buildings are there for life safety, means of escape, but there's something about community resilience, though, isn't there? And I'm not sure that I'd go as far as that. However, there is something about people.
I'm not saying it's a good idea, but
people being able to help themselves. I think there's something about people being able to help themselves and minimise that. But again, if we sort of touch on Grenfell, which is again a current sort of topic after the phase 2 sort of report that's recently been released, buildings should perform to a certain standard, and thus that standard is designed to allow the occupants either to stay put if that's the policy for the building, or for them to escape, and for firefighters to attend and to have a reasonable window of opportunity to be able to save the building. But it's a fascinating discussion. But again, the BA setting, a couple of BA sets in the lobby,
scary.
Yeah, that's one end of the spectrum, and then the other end is having nothing, where you could advocate just get out. But I think that the fire safety, the laws and the legislation that we have recently been refreshed, and again, this conversation is being had. I suppose the 72 people that lost their lives in Grenfell are very much at the forefront of everybody's minds, and the survivors, and those that were affected by Grenfell. And again, when you look at the outcomes of the sort of phase 2 report, the building should never have been allowed to have, be constructed with those materials and the failings that led up to the disaster that was Grenfell.
I get that, but I know Russ Timpson would speak very powerfully on this, far more knowledgeably than me. But that's like us saying, well, it should just be built properly. Okay, I'm going to turn around to Mr. Builder. You should have just built it properly, the building manager. And they go, oh, I'm trying, Carl. No idea how much it cost. And then I'm trusting them, and then on the other side of them, the residents are trusting them.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it.
Yeah. And I think
what I mean?
that
it's
is
like us turning to the people of Titanic and going, oh, well, you never should have sunk.
Yeah.
Okay. And it did.
Yeah.
So don't just keep saying that it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
But it
and
did.
That's the rub of the phase 2 report, isn't it? The bit that goes on now, and whilst the phase 2 is concluded, it's very much the next stage is around change. And I know there's another element to it as well in terms of legal redress and other bits and pieces. But for me, you're right. That change needs to happen. But you're right. Sometimes it comes back to you are faced with something that is it's not doing what you think it's going to do. And again, sadly, Grenfell was an example.
On a similar but different note, it reminds me of Christy, that we had on around Burns. She was saying, and again, totally flipping the script, but that quick initial action from zero responders when someone has a burn, they need that 20 minutes of call-in within the first 3 hours. It can be any time within the first 3 hours, but once you've missed it, you've missed it.
Yeah.
You can't go back and do it again. And the people that are going to do that are either the zero responders right there or the first people on the scene.
Yeah.
And it's probably around National Burns Week when this episode will go out. I think it's some point in October. I can't remember, sorry. Stuff like that, empowering people with the knowledge,
Yeah.
and that comes back to that first aid, CPR, defibrillators. Do you think we should start getting EpiPens in these defibrillator packs in areas? Now, again, I know that's a different thing but the thing is, if you give someone adrenaline and they're not in anaphylaxis, you don't kill them. You're just giving them a shot of adrenaline. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know how far we'll go with this, but
no, I'm not in. I'm afraid
blood sugar, defibs, adrenaline. I think there is a big element around that zero responder and about. I think we're very childlike in our community. Like, we rely on the government and the emergency services to solve everything. And I think as our sector continues to get less and less funding, it's not going to work. We do need to empower the public with a bit more resiliency in certain elements, I think.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection, this is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of community resilience. I think and it can mean many things to many people. So resilience in an area that's hit by regular flooding is one thing.
Yeah.
Resilience for communities that might have a long wait for medical assistance or fire service assistance or whatever. It's a huge thing. And yeah, people, it's that thing around, so most communities would want to do something to help themselves. But you're right, I think, people do by and large rely upon the emergency services. And I think my two sons, they're young men now, but when they were going through the school system, they did learn some pretty useful stuff, so they picked up a bit of first aid and things, it's that sort of thing around. If you think about the education system, it's probably only going to change by generation, isn't it? Are we teaching, it's a bigger discussion, but are we teaching our next generation to be truly resilient? Do we teach them life skills?
No. In a lot of places, I would say no, is my personal opinion. Public speaking, confidence, personal self-belief, as whimsical as that sounds for people. Communication skills. I know people would argue that, you can pick that up naturally through the school system, but all sitting in a line, facing the same direction, wear the same thing, do the same thing, be just a blur of each other, all look the same, sound the same, do the same. I don't think that's going to empower people to I think that was built for an age of manufacturing. That we built people to be useful in the revolution of industry, the industrial revolution, and try and get people useful in industry. And I think that's predominantly what the education sector is still pointing its way at. And I don't think that's the type of skill sets people are going to need when they go into the next 20 years.
No, I don't think I've ever used algebra in my professional career, but and other things.
I don't think you've ever used specifically algebra. But the concept of algebra, two of these is equal to one of them. We kind of use a little bit of that, but it's very, very loose connection for it. Change. Stephen Carver. He's a great speaker. My God, another fantastic episode that went out recently. And he was very much plug and play. Really, really, really funny guy. Internationally, Cranfield School of Management. Fantastic episode. He's been one of my favorite people to speak to recently.
I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It had some real life experience as well, which I thought was great. slightly envious that every time he goes and speaks to the armed forces, he gets a ride in a Typhoon or a tank or something like that.
Hey, know what you know.
Exactly. But it's fantastic. Do you know, I think one of the things that struck me about that was just he talked about the different types of project and project management and leading people through change, which I thought was fantastic.
Talk us through that, because you'll have been part of millions, or not millions, but many, many projects.
Yeah, well, it resonated with me, and I wish somebody had probably explained this to me 25 years ago. And he talks about the 4 types of project. And the first one was, he described it as painted by numbers.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, and I've fallen into this trap myself, is it's a management expectation that you can kind of throw a load of stuff at people and say, right, this is, we're gonna move through this from here to here. This is where we are. This is where we want to be, and and expect it all to sort of fall into place. And painted by numbers is, it's people relying upon knowing what the next step is, what to do next, where to go, etc. And he makes a really good point that you only usually get that at the end of a project, when you can look back and say, actually, yeah, we've got there. However, we've kind of felt our way through it, which I think is what most projects are like. And the second one was a fog project he talked about, which again, very familiar, which was, you don't know, what you're doing, you don't know where you're going, and you just find a path collectively, and, you might go down one end, come back. And he sort of makes a point that this is kind of probably representative of most change management projects, in that you sort of, you've got a general idea of what you want to achieve and where you want to go, but actually you find your way through it collectively. He then described making a movie, and this was having a director with a vision, somebody who's got that.
Take me back. Sorry, I know we'll go to making a movie. The fog.
Yeah.
The fog works with people with a lot of experience, I think.
Yes.
Sometimes, maybe. And my fear of some of the things we're trying to solve now is we're going through fog with people that have never gone through fog before. Yeah. And we can end up in some very strange places. And that can be very disheartening for the rest of the organization when new leaders haven't got a proven track record, or they don't have faith that they either come from the same sector, or that they can articulate a good understanding of what the challenge is. I think fog projects are good if you've got people with, like I say, strong track records. And I think we're heading into a lot of fog projects in the UK and putting a lot of resources into some of them that I don't think they're going to bear the fruits that we hope that they will in some of these. I think we've also got a lot of making a movie ones. I think one of our recent guests has that director analogy where they've got that very, very clear vision on what they want, but it almost acts on faith, and you've got to have someone who's very, very articulate, or very... We lost a leader, not fatally, and I wonder if this is a nice segue, and I apologise for interrupting the 4 types of project, but he might yet come on the podcast. West Mids. His name's escaping me.
Phil Lord was the previous chief. Oh, sorry, no, Oliver Lee.
Oliver Lee. I liked Oliver. I've had a couple of conversations with Oliver, and I liked him. Yeah. And to see him step down, and many people mentioned this on LinkedIn and different profiles, were like, wow, true leadership to see that person step down. I'm not sure, when I was reading some of the comments, that I entirely agreed. Well, the problem is I really liked the guy. And I felt like he had some great... I'm sure he's not perfect. I'm sure he probably stole some pick and mix when he was 6. Whatever. I'm sure he's not a perfect man. But I've not heard anybody say anything bad about him either, from my experiences with him. And then when he walked away, I thought he was going to do some great stuff for West Mids. And he was one of those that I thought could do the making a movie and the paint by numbers. And also probably someone that could lead people through the fog, which I think some organisations find themselves in. And we're not going to talk too specifically about West Mids because they've had a very challenging past and probably a very challenging future. And we wish them all the best. But again, a great leader from a different sector that I really hope he does come on, because they're the sort of people that I feel like we need. But sorry to drag you down that rabbit hole.
No, drop a line. I did see that myself, and I've been following Oliver on LinkedIn, and I've been impressed with his approach and some of the things that he's been doing. And I think when you look at sort of the position he's found himself in, he's clearly felt he's had to, his personal values are different to that of the way that he sees things going, and not wishing to speak for him at all. I can only comment on what I've seen.
Well, that's what he said. It was effectively nodded that some of the other players limited his ability to take the actions that he required was necessary that fitted within his own morals and values. And, you can't take it in too much more of a convoluted way to say that there's other people not letting him do what he thought was right. And you think, bloody hell, if someone at that position feels so limited. Oh, God. And I saw a number of people from his own organisation in the comments. Very sad to see him go.
Yeah, and I think that was the general sentiment from the organisation, the sector, really. And I think you're right, Pete. I think we probably need to approach Oliver and see if he'd maybe want to speak about that himself. And be a fascinating story to hear. And again, very credible leader from from background of the Royal Marines.
He doesn't seem the sort of person that would slag off the organisation and say, oh, well, because of this person. I don't think he'd do anything like that. I think he'd be very good. But yeah, he's probably been able to touch a very limited number of people in his organisation, and I'd love to be able to share some of his thoughts with the wider sector. So yeah, if he does hear this, it's another reach out, but we'll reach out in a more direct capacity. I apologise. Take us back. Four types of project. We're on to making a movie.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, making a movie. And again, that was sort of the director having, it relies on one person having a vision. It can be good, it can be bad. But again, it's having that one person's vision to kind of take you through. And I guess that's the classic definition of leadership, isn't it? You have a leader and you have followers. I know there's many views on that, but again, it's a type of that project change management. I think the final one was Quest. And this is the one we're probably we're least familiar with in the public sector and least familiar with within the emergency services, which relies upon, it starts with the question, is it going to work? And the answer to that is, haven't got a clue. And Stephen sort of talked about that around finding the dead ends quickly, so let's get out there, let's fail fast, let's find out what doesn't work. And he used a wonderful analogy, a very current analogy around the International Space Station and the sort of race between Boeing and SpaceX to get astronauts up there. And the headline was, of course, Boeing, were 4 years late in terms of being able to get that. SpaceX got there 4 years earlier and managed to get, people up there. And I think, and as an example of that, Boeing finally got people up there, but they can't get them back. And again, their only options is to either ask SpaceX to do that or ask the Russians. And again, we're a politics, religion, and football-free zone, Pete. But again, there's a real dynamic there, isn't there? Around, he used the approach of the Boeing approach will be huge committees, governance wrapped around it, and SpaceX, love him or hate him, Elon will be, failing fast and finding what works. And I think in the private sector, that'll be something you'll be familiar with. Certainly, I know I am, but within the vast majority of my service, within the emergency services and public sector, being accountable for public money, having Quest projects is very difficult. but again, it stifles innovation.
It's hard having quest projects, but having a quest mindset is effectively what we do on the incident ground.
Yes.
Really, we make a quick assessment of something, and we take a quick course of action with the best of intentions on the limited information that we have at hand. And if it doesn't work, we switch tacks and adapt. We're not very agile as organizations, and people would argue that's because of our size. Not really. Your SpaceX's and others of the world are enormous, more significantly larger budgets than ours. But I think it is the element that we are upholden as public servants to show an extraordinary level of due diligence prior to taking any action. But yeah, moving fast and breaking things is probably something I do more on in my private life than I'm able to do in my professional life. And I'm sure you felt the frustrations of that in yours as well. It's that messy middle management. Again, they always seem to get beaten with the ugly stick and blamed for the glacial pace of change. But I think as more people retire and more people move through, I think we'll get more agile, but also we are at risk of having set change for the sake of change, just because someone's not been in a position where they can do anything about it before, and now they've jumped into a higher rank and are suddenly empowered to break things and turn it on its head. And I suppose it's balancing whether or not they just doing that because that's the way they thought it should always be done, or whether or not that will prove to be a change that is of benefit for the wider collective.
Who knows? And of course, one of the things that's sort of rattling on in the background for the fire sector at the moment is still the reform agenda. And I think it'll be interesting, not wanting to delve into politics at all, Pete, but again, it'll be an interesting year for the sector in terms of whether or not some of those reform changes do see the light of day. I was encouraged to see the College of Fire sort of writ large across the Grenfell piece around just having a central College of Fire. Very ironic, and many listeners have probably been nodding their head now to that we did have a central and do have a central College of Fire. And again, I'm not going to go over all ground, but again, I think the College of Policing is a huge force within sort of the policing world, and I think a College of Fire would serve, if done properly and funded correctly, would be a fantastic benefit to the sector, which may bring around innovation, research, development, and leading best practice. So. There's some green shoots, but maybe that's one of them.
Do you think that, speaking on that point, and give me a second to try and pull it up, because it was Patrick Cox who actually brought it up, and Patrick was speaking about doing an episode together in the not too distant future, because he did respond very directly in that, and it was put out. It's quite a few weeks ago now, but he says, I read that in the Grenfell report includes a recommendation that the government establish a fire and rescue college for the training of firefighters and incident commanders to a uniform standard to address the deficiencies in the service exposed by the Grenfell fire. The Fire Service College, on whose staff he had the privilege of serving for almost 16 years, was established for exactly that reason in 1941 in the Ocean Hotel, Saltdean, by Brigadier Hewlett under the National Fire Service. IT was transformed from there to premises in Dorking in the Fire Services Technical College established in Morton in March of 1974, the latter being dedicated to training fire prevention officers, later retired fire safety officers, and expected to apply their fire service knowledge under the Fire Precautions Act, and they activated it, and then they took on residential buildings. The two colleges were amalgamated in 1982 at Morton and turned into an executive agency, in other words, set up to fail, in his words, in 1992, and finally run down by forcing it to compete with the fire services themselves as private providers who fancied a slice of the funds the Treasury cunningly removed from directly funding the college and instead paying to the services to spend more on value for money. So that was when they used to get given tokens, wasn't it, to go to the college? You might know more about this than me.
Yeah, well,
you given money and then you could rejuvenate it from the college only when you needed it.
Yeah.
But then they started giving the money directly to the services.
Yeah.
And then he's put, which nobody monitored, which most interpreted as being able to spend it in-house and not at the college. Then came Mr. Prescott and Mr. Blair, who wanted to replace officers with managers, starting at the top, and then geniuses who persuaded the politicians to scrap the Fire Service Examinations Board, progression, training, and ranks, replacing these with roles and integrated personal development systems. What actually happened when they switched it? Do you know?
Yeah, I remember. It was. I mean, I read that article.
In your career.
I read that article, and it resonated with me. A lot of it resonated with me because I do remember the rank to roll piece. I remember the college. For many years, I've spent probably nearly 4 months of my life in total down at the Fire Service College on various courses, and going right the way back to the early late 80s, early 90s, when there was some fantastic junior officer progression courses. There was the benchmark standard for fire safety courses. Specialist marine firefighting course. The facilities at the Fire Service College, in my view, second to none, and they always have been. And it's a wonderful facility. And I always enjoy going to the Fire Service College. I do. I've got some very happy memories. For me, and I'm sure for many, many people. But the bottom line,
networking opportunities, great facilities, the way you're treated.
Yeah. And
very good.
I think one of the things that Fire Service College suffered from, and there was a window of opportunity, I think, when it was sort of centrally funded to some of that funding going out to fire and rescue services. And I remember the fire and rescue service I was in at the time chose to rather than send people to the Fire Service College, because it became a competitive market for for fire and rescue services to demonstrate best value, which is a statutory requirement on local authorities. And if you can get the same level of, let's say, fire safety course or leadership development course, and you can do it in-house by an accredited provider at a third of the cost, then legally fire authorities have to do that. And I saw a real shift away from the Fire Service College. And I think maybe, and it's a personal view, is that at the time, and I think the author of that article alludes to it, that the agility perhaps wasn't there for the Fire Service College to compete with that competitive market for leadership development, fire safety development. Whilst it didn't have the facilities, so you didn't have a ship, you didn't have all the high-rise industrials and all that stuff. What you could do was do other things, and I think it was a real challenge for the college.
I think the quality instructors didn't want to go to the college. It is my personal thoughts, not yours. From speaking to a number of them, there was people with a great deal of skill sets, maybe like yourself, or maybe some others. We can use other people as examples, and they wanted to keep teaching, but they didn't want to go to the college because some found themselves surrounded by some not very knowledgeable individuals who had just gone down there for an easy ticket and an easy ride. It didn't really matter what they taught. They had a prospectus, and they had a course layout of what they were actually going to deliver, and no one was really knowing what good would look like. And I think there was a long period of time, and perhaps still exists in some places now, where firefighters come back from the college with a whole host of things they've not learned, and then that service is left to do some sort of transitionary course to fill in all the gaps, some sort of conversion course. And like you say, it just started to breed that, let's just do it ourselves. And he says in his, now we've come full circle again. Those responsible for ripping the training system, progression training and examination system apart, which, while not perfect, at least ensured everyone got the same training, everyone got the same development, and ideas were freely exchanged by the students on courses lending added value, are now happily retired, have left a mess behind them with a service that is now dependent on outsourced training delivery by a plethora of contractors. And he closes by some expletives about how incandescently angry he is about this. And I'm sure many people share his views, though perhaps not putting them as publicly as he has chosen to. But it is frustrating to see a recommendation like that come out from the government, and you think, how do we get back to that? Do we want to get back to that? We've referenced a couple of services already that have just spent tens of millions of pounds on their own training facilities.
Yeah, and the business case for that stacks up. They can do the training, they can monitor the quality of the training, they can get the outcomes that they need, and of course, your training facilities are bespoke to your community risk management plan, which is effectively what it should do. But I think you're right. I think everyone's probably got a view on it, but I think for me, I see it as a positive that the discussion's now being had again. Because if you look across to the College of Policing, it's funded, I think, to the tune of about 65 million. It sets the benchmark.
By whom?
By the government. It's a government funded.
Because the Fire Service College won't get any government funding now. It's completely private, does it? It's
I'm not
obviously
sure
run
on the
by
funding
Capita.
formula for the.
I'm pretty sure they don't get any.
College. I know that it's owned by, I think, Capita at the moment, but I'm not entirely sure whether it's entirely private or subsidised. I don't know. But I think for me to move to a model where, and my hope would be that it would be funded in the same way as the National College of Policing, where they do have, funding for researching best standards, codes of practice, the national piece that
well, who would run it?
Talked about.
Do you know what I mean? Because the National Fire Chiefs Council isn't big enough.
No, but that's where the
haven't got enough fat on the bone to be seconding people for 2 years like they used to.
No, and I think that's where the funding comes in. That for it to be done meaningfully and effectively, I think that level of investment needs. What I would hate to see is a virtual college of fire. I think.
Oh, I hate it.
I think that would not serve
Just
as well.
Bolt on to Nog. It'd be terrible.
Yeah, and I think the window of opportunities there, and I'm sure that colleagues are pressing, and having that conversation now around, that there is a benefit for having a centralised facility, and there's pros and cons for it because obviously colleagues in Scotland, Wales, all the devolved administrations, and even living in the north of England, it's a 4-hour drive to the college, and who says that the Morton in the Marsh is the right place for it? We're all assuming that because there's a site there.
It's beautiful though, Carl. It's bloody gorgeous, and if you lose it, you'll never get it back.
Love the place.
I know, but I know logistically it's challenging for other people.
But it's positive that the conversation's being had,
I
think, Pete. I think that's the thing I'd take from it.
It's just a massive amount of money it's going to take to go into it. Right. I think we've covered a lot there, but one of your favourite quotes, which I did want to circle to, because I always like my quotes, you know what I'm like? Fate is a hunter. When it comes for you, it comes for you. What does that mean to you?
Love that. So, I love my books, Pete, and I've had a change of scenery for my book this month. It's I'm reading a book called Area 51, which is an uncensored history of America's top secret military base. Now, it's written and narrated, because I'm listening to the audiobook, by Annie Jacobson, and I was intrigued. It's a long book. It's a 12-hour book, and I'm gripped. Because what I didn't realise was just the history of Area 51 and what it was from, government test facility, nuclear testing, spy plane development. I'm less interested in the conspiracy theory, but actually, this author has gone back over thousands of declassified documents and has actually written the history of Area 51. But in doing so, she's caught up with some of the people that used to were the original test pilots for the U-2 spy planes, and one of which was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and he used that quote that and seeing a few of his friends sadly die in combat, fate is a hunter. When it comes to you, when it comes to you, it comes for you. And I think that was a really powerful quote for me, and I thought, wow, the older I get, and I am more inclined to be more fatalistic around, things happen for a reason, and do you know what? I thought it was a really powerful quote, and I think it was the guy that attributed it to, I don't know his name, but he thought that just before he ejected at something like 50,000 feet out of a spy plane, and he lived to tell the tale. And I just thought it was a great quote, in many ways.
I would agree. Amor fati is Latin, lover of fate, and I often think about this when things happen to you, because when something happens to you, it's neither good nor bad. It is what you make of it. There was one that I was reading recently about the man and his son, and they run a farm. I don't know if you've heard this one before. So the man and his son run a farm, and I forget the exact context, so I'll fumble my way through it, but they grow potatoes as an example, and they're barely making it by. Dad and son grow potatoes, and they have a horse that ploughs the field. Dad injures himself, and the son has to do it all himself, and he's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And the dad will say, well, we'll see. And the son's going as hard as he can. He's trying to make it work. And then one day the horse gets loose and it bolts over the hill. And the son runs inside. He's pouring with tears. And he says, Dad, we've lost the horse. We're ruined. We're never going to be able to make, the bills. It's over. And he goes, oh, well, we'll see. The next day the son comes out to start ploughing the field by himself. He's had his porridge, he's got some motivation, he's going to at least make a crack of it. And as he starts getting going, over the hill comes thundering down his horse with another 30 horses. And they all run themselves in, and he opens up the paddock and the horses go all, and he's like, Jesus Christ, we've got 30 horses. He runs inside and says to his dad, Dad, we've got 30 horses. You know, we're rich. We're in the horse trading business now. Forget the potatoes. And his dad goes, oh, well, we'll see. Week or so later, the son's got into horse training, and he's making a few deals and stuff like that, but he's got one particularly stubborn horse. And this horse is not having it. So he does some one-to-one with it in the stable and tries to break it, and the horse kicks him and breaks his leg. And the son, he has to go to hospital, and he's home now, and now he's inside with his dad. And neither of them can work. And he's like, we are completely fucked. We're going to be ruined. I have to sell all these horses and try and make it work. And the dad goes, oh, we'll see. And then the next day, war is announced on the news. And local government come marching through, and they're taking anybody able-bodied, and they've got to come to war, and they come to the house and they take all the horses, and they say to the father, we need to take your son. And he says, my son's broken his leg, he can't fight. So they don't take his son, and everyone says, oh, you must be really ashamed, because your son can't go and fight for the country. And he goes, oh, we'll see. 1 week later, there was a massacre. They all got set up to fail, and none of the children come home, because they all died at war. And the son that wasn't able to go to war is now recovered, and he goes on to lead the community and look after everybody and all that sort of stuff. And the whole story for me just says, look, things aren't good or bad. They're just what you make. You get lemons, make lemonade. Yeah. Depends what you can do about it. Yeah. So we'll all be faced with setbacks. We'll all be faced with challenges. Are we in control of some of them? Yes, no. I think you've got to create enough surface area for luck to stick to. That's why I always try and be involved in a lot of stuff, have a lot of conversations with people, be willing to get over yourself and put yourself out there, say yes to things, be enthusiastic in everything that you do, because you never know. Yeah. You've got to have lots of plates spinning. You've got to have enough surface area for luck to stick to. It's the old analogy that, someone said, oh, you're so lucky that you can hit home runs like that. Yeah, you know what? The more I practice, the luckier I seem to get.
It's great. Yeah, I love that.
That's my waffle.
No, it's good. And we're going to circle back to the beginning, Pete, and it's about using your 4,000 weeks wisely.
Yes, sir. Make a difference. You can never leave footprints if you're too busy walking on tiptoes. So I'll acknowledge you and Sarah and the team once again for stepping into this silly, weird world of podcasting and helping us collectively make a difference. I'm not going to pretend we're going to be the influence that like the Paul Grimwoods of the world have done, but we've got value to add, and we can bring a lot of interesting people to the attention of even more interesting people. And really appreciate you, really appreciate Sarah, and really appreciate the listener as well.
Yeah, it's great to get the feedback as well. So, but great to see you, Pete. Always a treat.
You too, brother. I will see you on the next one. Love you lot.
You too, mate. See you soon.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, and please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're around the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.